Hello everyone! Update 5 finally dropped, and with it came signals for trains. But what does that mean and how do we use them? That's what we're going to have a look at today. So firstly, let us have a look at how do we unlock them and what do we need to build. They get unlocked pretty well directly together with the trains and stations, so you don't need any additional unlocks. That's very neat. And they aren't really difficult to build. Each signal costs 2 steel pipes, 1 copper sheet, and the standards do cost additional 2 electronics. The path signals costs 1 computer. So all stuff we already produce when we get to trains anyways. So with that out of the way, let's come to the interesting stuff. How do they work? Well, it's actually pretty easy. A signal stops a train if between itself and the next signal is any train on the track. It also blocks all traffic going in the opposite direction, unless you have a signal going in the opposite direction as well. Well, one exception to that rule: if your track has a dead end, it also stops the train if there is another train between itself and the end of the track. That of course only works if the signals go in both directions. By the way, if you have 2 tracks intersecting itself, they're going to count for the signals as one piece of track, even if a train can't go from one to another. That is of course to avoid collisions. But they also do that when they are pretty close together. So, as we can see in that example, with 1 signal only, the signal is going to give us a warning that the signal loops to itself. Of course, we have a round track, 1 signal loops to itself. It's a problem because it doesn't have anything behind it can check. As soon as we place a second signal, it's going to work. You see the signal turn green, and we have a separated track in 2 segments. But if we place the signals on this very narrow path, it's going to see the tracks as one piece. And that means even though technically the signal wouldn't loop in itself because we have 2 on the track, they are so close together, the tracks, that they count as one piece and we get that error message. So make sure that you have your tracks separated far enough. As far as I could figure out, it is enough if you have your tracks offset by 8 meters. Okay, with that said, let's look into some specific scenarios. First one is the single track with trains going in both directions. To make this work, we're going to need a passing siding or a passing loop. Building those is pretty easy. Just look for a long enough straight line and build a parallel railroad at least as long as your longest train is. And then merge them on both ends. But with that, our problem is going to start. A train is always going to try to take the shortest route it can to the destination we want to go to. Because our parallel line is a little bit offset, it's always longer, so it's always going to take the original line. And we don't want that. But signals have an additional feature here, and we're going to make use of that. As long as you have the signal only in one direction on one part of the track, it's blocking all traffic in the opposite direction. So by placing a signal in one direction only at the end and the beginning of the passing track, and on the same place in the opposite direction on the main track, we're going to make it so that train can only go on the passing track in one direction and only in the main track on the different direction. And with that we can make 2 trains on 1 track work. If you have more than 2 trains, you're going to need additional siding loops or a longer siding loop separated in as many segments as trains you're going to have on that track. Okay, with that done, let's look at the next scenario. a one-track railway with turnaround loops at the stations. Okay, here we're going to learn our next important tidbit. And that is that you never place a signal on a single line railroad. Because that would mean that two trains could drive onto the single line from both directions, blocking each other from going on. So instead we're going to build the signals at both ends of all loops before the loops merge in itself to create the single track railroad. But that's not enough, because each loop is one segment at the moment. That means that while a train is within the segment, the next train would stop at the end of the single line and can't drive into a loop because there's already a train in a loop. But the train in a loop can't leave because there's a train on the tracks behind it. We can avoid that by placing an additional signal inside of the loop and separating it in 2 or maybe even 3 pieces. I find it really useful to have at least one signal at the entrance of each of my stations. Only one issue left. There can always be only one train on the single track part of our railroad. If this single track part is really long, like half of the map or something like that, that would mean that all trains always need to wait till the one train who is on the track passes all of the track before the next can go on the track. So if we have a really long track, just build some passing loops like I explained before. Interesting there is, if you have only one passing loop on a long track, that means that the trains are always going to wait and these passing loop for each other, effectively forcing them to not be able to catch up to each other, to avoid irregularities and breaks in your resource deliveries, like Kibitz had in his first long train project. Well, next we have the loop. It doesn't matter if it's really a big circle or if you have 2 parallel lines turning around at the end of the station, like I have here in my example. This is actually really easy to signal. Just have at least one signal more than you have trains on the loop. This will make sure that you always at least one free segment where a train can move into. That way all trains can keep moving. But they won't be moving all at the same time. Instead of it will be always one train after another. To avoid that problem, just do a few more signals. About double I find is pretty useful and works pretty well to have them move without a delay. In most cases you can just place as many signals as you want. It doesn't really have a downside, unless you have many trains delivering the same kind of resource. In that case, you should keep in mind that too many signals means the trains can build a caravan all driving behind each other and interrupting the steady flow of your resources again. To avoid that, limit your signals and pace them out evenly. With that, let's go to crossings. First of all, crossings on a single track line. Keep in mind that if you have a crossing on a single track line, all ways going to the crossing and the crossing itself counts as one segment and needs to have no signals on it. If you do it like I show you here, you're going to see that the trains are going to block each other. So, like we did before, place the signals at the end of the loops and everything works fine. Because this is even more track work than the normal single track lines, it is even more beneficial and probably more necessary to have passing loops on those long tracks. On two-way crossings, that's the first case where the path signals are going to come in really handy. Path signals allow trains to pass each other and to have multiple trains on one segment as long as the paths of the trains don't intersect themselves. In our case, that means more than one train can be on the crossing at the same time as long as they can't crash into each other. To build this, simply build a path signal at each entrance to the crossing and build a signal at each exit of the crossing as well. That way we basically made it to one segment, so only one train could be on there, but again, because of the pathway signals, we can have multiple trains on there as long as their paths don't intersect. Okay, lastly, let's look into roundabouts. I know there are many discussions about roundabouts, about their efficiency and usefulness, but it doesn't matter. If you have a roundabout or you want to have one roundabout, here's what you're going to need to know. Okay, as far as I could figure out, the fastest roundabout I could find is built with block signals. Just place the block signals before the roundabout on the ongoing and offgoing track and build an additional between the tracks on the roundabout to segment it for trains going around it for more than one exit. But this kind of roundabout has a disadvantage. A train can't be longer than the distance between two signals on the roundabout. Because if it is, multiple trains could block each other on the roundabout and stop the whole thing altogether. Here's a high-speed example of how this could look like, and a second one sped up as well with shorter trains to show you that with shorter trains it works just fine. But don't sweat it if you need longer trains. All we need to do is placing path signals in front of each entrance to the roundabout, as well as have no signals on the roundabout itself. Like I said, that is going to be a little bit slower, but it's going to work for trains of each size. Okay, with that I have only one more thing to say except of the typical like, subscribe and press the bell icon, of course. And that is that I'm planning to redoing my advanced guide to trains with all the different changes which now came over the years since I'd done the original. So let me know of all useful tips and tricks and stuff you think that should be in a really good train guide in the comments. I would really appreciate that. Of course, I'm going to take some more time for scripting and editing, so it should be a lot more smooth than this one is. With that, thank you so much for watching. See ya and have fun gaming.